Good evening, you're watching No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The UK finally has a new Prime Minister. Liz Truss will take over from Boris Johnson tomorrow. After weeks of a bitterly contested election, she defeated Rishi Sunak in a Conservative Party vote, winning 57% of the vote. Now, this is actually a narrower win than many expected, and we'll tell you why that's significant a little later. Now, Rishi Sunak was the overwhelming favourite among Tory party MPs to become Prime Minister. But it's among the wider Conservative Party members that he lost out. Most of the over 170,000 Tory members who voted are older white men. So was the primary factor that went against Rishi Sunak his race, or is there much more to it? Liz Truss, meanwhile, has made many tall promises, and she inherits a Britain that's facing an unprecedented cost of living crisis and faces what is forecast to be a long recession triggered by skyrocketing inflation that has hit more than 10% in July. My colleague Radhika Iyer now reports from London on some of the reactions to this big moment.
I'm at the Houses of Parliament. Just across the road is Queen Elizabeth Centre, where the announcement was made by the Conservative Party leadership that Liz Truss is now Prime Minister of Britain. This is Downing Street. Here are a few people who are happy to share their opinion. There's one board which says we demand better. Ladies, thank you for joining us. Tell me a little bit about you. What do you do?
I'm retired. Grandchildren. I have never been interested in politics before, about 5-6 years ago, and then I realised what a mess this government was making of this country.
And what is your opinion now?
It's carrying on making a mess. It's not got any better, it's got worse. We're in deep trouble financially. We're in deep trouble with people's power, electricity and gas bills. The NHS hasn't had enough funding from the government. There's huge waiting lists. The currency has gone down. The exports have gone down. We're in deep trouble.
Okay. What about yourself? Tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I agree with everything my friend here said. Yeah, we wanted to remain in the European Union. We thought the unity, the solidarity, the togetherness would be much better for this country, and nothing's changed my opinion since then.
Well, Liz Truss is a Remainer.
She's not anymore. She's adamantly not, so she says.
What about you? Do you think Rishi would make a better Prime Minister?
No, not really. I don't think so. Sadly, we're in such deep trouble. I think we need a general election, and really, my own personal view is we probably need a coalition, and people have to work together. The government or the coalition government have to work together and make some sensible decisions for the people of this country, not just the few mega rich people.
What about yourself? A few people I spoke to, an engineer I spoke to said Rishi probably could have handled money better. Somebody else I spoke to said, well, it doesn't make a difference to me. They're all just the same.
I think he has more of a clue about the economics. I think he would have been better in that respect. But both of them are driven by ideology that I don't agree with.
So mixed reactions, like I said, and what is now going to happen is that Liz Truss anyway will meet the Queen tomorrow in Scotland, take over officially, form some sort of a skeleton cabinet to start with, and then officially face the Prime Minister hour in the Parliament on Wednesday, September the 7th.
Well, just a slice of some of the opinion there on the streets of London from Radhika Iyer. Let me go straight across to our panellists this evening. Writer Farooq Dhondi joins us live from London. Shruti Kapila, Professor of History at the University of Cambridge, is with us. Sani Hundal, Deputy Editor at the Opinion Desk with The Independent. We're also going shortly across to Mr. Tanmanjeet Singh Desi, Member of Parliament from the Labour Party as well. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us. Shruti Kapila, we had a fascinating conversation about this a few weeks ago. But while the outcome is not a big surprise, what did you make of the slightly narrower margin? I mean, Liz Truss certainly expected to have done better than this, and why is that important?
Thanks, Nidhi, for having me back. You're quite right. I mean, even I was expecting a much wider margin. And I think once you see the breakdown, once it comes down, there is obviously a demographic disparity. I think the younger Tory voters would have gone for Sunak. Having said that, I also want to say, flag straight up, that I don't think race mattered as much as perhaps Indian audiences might think about it. I do think that Sunak really did very badly in the first debate, where he tried to talk down at Liz Truss. So in fact, if you're going to talk about identity, I think that his kind of slightly male perspective of mansplaining to her went down extremely badly with people who were sitting on the fence. But so I think, but he kind of worked himself up to a smaller margin in the last few weeks. And as you rightly pointed out, Truss is going to face a kind of a membership, and the MPs are not really behind her. And the long list of challenges is excessive, as it's going to be crucial. So it's actually, as again your people have been saying on the streets, I think she's a sitting duck of a prime minister. I will kind of venture out and say perhaps there will be a general election by the next summer.
Okay, so you're expecting a general election sooner rather than later. Farooq Dhondi, do you agree with that analysis? But if you look at the demographic, the breakup of Conservative Party members, many of them, there are about 172,000 of them, we know that today because they announced it. Many of them, or most of them, are white men, older, middle class. So do you think race is not a factor at all for them?
I don't think race was a factor in this particular case, because if you look at the recent history of the Conservative Party, they elect all sorts of blacks, Asians, all manner of people who are perhaps not even the best choice, in my opinion, such as Priti Patel to be Home Minister and Rishi Sunak to be Chancellor and Nadeem Zahawi. Black people in what I call Uncle Tom's cabinet. They are not actually, a racist party in that sense. They just want the ideology straight, and the ideology has to be a commitment to traditional conservatism, which hasn't even defined itself properly. So I think that there'll be a huge breakup of the party after this. And the supporters of Rishi, I don't think, from the campaign, even though he clapped her in onto the platforms of prime ministership and leadership, I don't think that they will support Liz Truss. Neither will the people who support Boris Johnson. And what the professor was just saying, there might be an election soon. I think that's quite likely, because I've heard from members of the Tory party that Boris Johnson still has 30, 40 supporters in Parliament who might write letters by December to ask Liz Truss to go. Even though she's prime minister, she'll be prime minister for 3 or 4 months, and then they'll try and find an alternative, and they say Boris Johnson will stand again if Liz Truss has to stand down when the parliamentary vote takes place. The 1922 committee has to determine that, and it might happen as soon as December. And that will just show that the Tory party is in a complete mess. Wanting to become the leader of the Tory party is like wanting to be the captain of the Titanic.
Exactly. And that's why I mentioned that the margin of victory here is important. And we have this graphic, this taking people through some data. If you look at Boris Johnson, when he won the leadership contest in 2019, it was with 66.4% of the vote. David Cameron back in 2005 with 67.6% of the vote. Ian Duncan Smith 60.7% in 2001. So she has won by 57%. So it is much narrower than her predecessors. And we're already seeing it create a lot of sort of an unsettling feeling within the Conservative Party. Sunny Hundal, but let me take this to you. How do you look at Liz Truss now, what she's going to mean for the UK? But also when you look back at Rishi Sunak's campaign, for the Conservatives, was the loyalty factor perhaps ultimately what did him in, the fact that he was seen as the one who backstabbed Boris Johnson?
Thanks for having me on the show, Nidhi. I think that Absolutely. It's true that loyalty was a big factor in why, Rishi Sunak did not win. Very early on, he was portrayed as the guy who backstabbed Boris Johnson, who is still very popular with the membership of the party. But there's another side to this, which is that Rishi thought this was going to be a debate about economics only, as in who can manage to steer the economy going forward. And I think that's where he made a mistake in not understanding that actually what people wanted, the Conservative Party membership wanted, was someone who can fight on other fronts. And for me, it was very much about cultural issues, on immigration, on where the party is going to go in terms of Brexit, where is it going to go in terms of social issues and cultural issues within the party, even gender identity, all these issues that are coming up. And Rishi immediately focused on, the fact that he can manage to bring inflation down. And that is important. And certainly for the country, it's important, but for the membership, it wasn't as important as a lot of other issues. And so even though Rishi was the Leave candidate, the guy who voted to leave, and Liz Truss was the woman who voted to remain within the European Union, she was able to position herself as the person who would fight for traditional cultural conservative values.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating simply because, Britain is dealing with this cost of living crisis at the moment, high inflation, it's staring at a recession, and you would think that voters would actually put the economy front and center more than what you say. And I find that very, very interesting. Let me get the opposition's point of view on this. Mr. Tanmanjeet Singh Desi, Member of Parliament from the Labour Party, joining us as well. Sir, what do you make of this? What is Liz Truss going to mean for the UK economy, and does Labour smell an opportunity here?
But Nidhi, I think it was a respectable display in terms of the overall outcome for Rishi Sunak getting 43% of the vote. But I think it was a very toxic contest wherein there was a lot of mudslinging. And I think ultimately what counted against Rishi, I know that despite him being of British origin, he didn't often take up Indian issues within the House. But there was a concerted campaign amongst some British Indians to become temporarily members of the Conservative Party in order that they could vote in that election. But what really counted against him, I think, was that the Boris Johnson faction conspired that they wanted anybody but Rishi. And within that toxicity of that contest, the likes of Rishi Sunak, when Rishi said that, look, I will ensure that there is going to be growth in the economy. I'm talking about managing the economy really well. You mentioned about an upcoming recession, that I will deal with all of those issues. Well, the likes of Liz and others countered back to say, well, hey-ho, Rishi, you've actually been the Chancellor, you've been the Finance Minister for the last 2.5 years. What have you been doing? We are now laden with the highest tax burden in the UK since the 1950s, the biggest drop in living standards since the 1950s. We've got now the highest inflation for well over 40 years. So under all those parameters, they counted, and many others, that Rishi Sunak has failed. Conversely, the likes of Rishi and others accused Liz Truss of fantasy economics, of taking a holiday from reality, because some of what she was proposing in terms of huge tax cuts, and none of those were fully funded. In fact, I think that Rishi and many of us who did accuse her of that have got a lot of respect, in the sense that the Institute for Fiscal Studies, a very independent and highly respected Institute for Fiscal Studies, they pointed out that if Liz Truss follows through with her plans, we will have an even higher amount of inflation within the UK. So on all of those fronts, I think we are up to choppy waters. But Liz Truss, by the way, Nidhi, is somebody who the likes of me have described as a comedian politician. She from
I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to that in just a moment. But can I just ask you, if I may, about this whole sort of racism angle that Indian writers in particular like to talk about? And I find this particularly fascinating because, India as a country, I think that wouldn't have taken kindly to say Sonia Gandhi becoming Prime Minister, but we like to point at others and say that they're racist if they don't want a Rishi Sunak. But do you think that racism has been a factor for the top job at least?
Look, many of us were of the opinion that although he had more support from amongst members of parliament, that when it came down to the wider membership, that given the composition of much of the membership who are very much more right-wing, there's been well-documented infiltration in terms of former UKIP members, Brexit Party members, that many of them, for many of them, it would not be palatable to have somebody like Rishi Sunak in charge. Now, that's not actually representative of the wider Conservative Party membership, but there are a significant proportion who hold opinions very anti-immigrant, anti-migrant. So some of those individuals would not have taken very kindly to Rishi Sunak being leader. And I think they would have voted in huge numbers to ensure that Liz did.
That's interesting. Let me get to Shruti Kapila on that point. Do you see the sort of sheer hypocrisy of that, Shruti Kapila? That many of those agitated about the whole racism thing, no, we don't want, an outsider or Sonia Gandhi to be Prime Minister of India. We were very happy when Manmohan Singh became instead. But, we see racism in everything.
Yeah, I think the right comparison, quite apart from Sonia Gandhi, would be if actually you had a Muslim Prime Minister in India. It's that kind of minority status that ethnic minorities in Britain occupy, rather than one which is so, in the sense that Sonia Gandhi, though, is European, she's one of very few people of the variety living in India, of that variety. But I actually would like to disagree with the former Labour Party member, MP, because if you look at Ladbrokes, which is the betting agency here, it says that, the likely successors to Liz Truss are going to be Kwasi Kwarteng or Kemi Badenoch, both African origin Tories. And as Farooq Dhandi rightly pointed out, what the Tories have done in the last 10 years is effectively put their front bench, particularly on questions of immigration, race, empire, legacy. You have, as it were, non-white people making the most aggressive and most exclusive arguments for it. It's like as if, so I think there is a flip and there is a crisis for Labour, whether they admit it or not. They do not have a female leader till date, and this is the third female Prime Minister the Conservatives are going to have. I think these are turbulent times for British politics because party politics and party identity is what is at stake. Even the economy issue where actually Sunak came undone he was seen to be too much of a big spender. And he also proved to be quite inflexible, even when, polls were telling him that, Tory members did not want to hear him spending so big over the inflationary crisis. He dug his heels and thought that being an expert, but being the man of experience, this will see him through.
But that's a great,
but no, I think what you're seeing is a retreat to old Tory conservative policies on the economy.
Mr. Desi, do you want to quickly respond to that? The fact that actually the Conservatives today are far more, shall we say, representative of different groups, ethnic groups, etc., than one would have imagined even 10 years ago.
Well, as I raised on the floor of the House, what is the point of having black and brown cabinet ministers sitting on those Conservative front benches if they are acting directly against the interests of those black and brown communities? And that's why there are huge accusations of tokenism with regards to the Conservative Party. And that is why many minority communities are actually opposed to those so-called black and brown cabinet ministers because of the policies. If we look at the Nationality and Borders Bill, which was being pushed through, headed by Priti Patel, what was actually happening there? The citizenship of individuals like myself, Sani Hundal, who I know is the resident of the UK, many of us who were born and brought up in Britain, who are of Indian heritage or of other heritage, we would have had the sword of Damocles hanging over us and could have had our citizenship withdrawn. That's why there was a huge backlash. So just because somebody has a woman in charge, or just because there is an ethnic minority, doesn't mean that the ethnic minority communities within Britain, that they are actually enamored by those individuals or by those policies. Tokenism is not going to get us anywhere. What we need is strong policies in terms of what your panelists mentioned with regards to the study of colonialism. It was the Labour Party that was actually proposing that we need to have within our curriculum the study of Jallianwala Bagh. We need to have the study of colonialism to make sure that the present generation doesn't repeat the horrible mistakes of the past. And we need to make sure that we have history lessons, warts and all. It was only the Labour Party that was proposing that. And even now, if we look at tackling the cost of living crisis, it's only the Labour Party that has proposed a fully funded £27 billion plan to actually tackle the cost of living crisis, while the likes of Liz Truss have been evading.
Let me get to that in the final comments. With the panel, Farooq Dhondi, does Liz Truss inspire any confidence in you in dealing with this cost of living crisis? I can see Shruti Kapila shaking her head.
Absolutely not. The only thing I heard from her, and I've been trying to follow this leadership contest, however boring it is, that Liz Truss, the only thing she has ever said as a matter of policy, certainly nothing about culture, but she said, I will cut taxes. And by cutting taxes, I will stimulate the economy. In other words, what she wants to do is give capitalists back their money from which is coming to the public purse, and hopes that they will turn Britain into a dynamo investment nation again. I think it is extremely unlikely because she hasn't said what taxes she will cut, who she will give taxes back to. And that's really absolutely the only policy she has ever announced. The rest is all, it's fluff. She says, I will carry on with the Ukraine war. Yes, in the way that Boris did, I'll support Ukraine. She's also said, I will deal with the NHS. How is she going to deal with the NHS? It's down on its knees. People are waiting in ambulances outside hospitals for 24 hours before they can find a bed in the place. It's short of 50,000 nurses.
So she's not specific. In other words, she's vague. And Sunny,
she has no policy.
Yeah. So Sunny, the last word is to you. She's also managed to annoy allies, and others, even before she became Prime Minister, with some of the things that she said. Is she, you think, a comedian politician as well, as one of our panelists described her?
No, I think that she's far more astute than people realize, because she actually managed to win the contest when no one expected her to. She is a chameleon. She changes her colors very quickly and senses what people want. And so throughout this contest, she's made a lot of promises that she will basically just ignore once she's Prime Minister. And I suspect she will do much more on energy bills than people expect. And that will give her a boost in terms of popularity. But I do think it's worthwhile emphasizing that not only does Britain have its third woman Prime Minister, and while I have a lot of respect for my friend Tanmanjit Desi, I think the Labour Party has a lot of work to do on representing a wide range of ethnic minorities and women at the senior level. And you can't just dismiss that by saying that, these Tories are not going to do their policies and we have better policies on cost of living. Representation matters, and the fact that the Conservative Party nearly gave their keys to the number one office in this country to someone who is British Indian is, I think, a huge issue that cannot be ignored. As Shruti said, it's like giving keys to someone who in India to someone who's Muslim. Can you imagine the country doing that? And right now, I don't think I can imagine India, for all its focus on diversity and having having tolerance for people of different backgrounds and different ethnicities and religions in India, I don't think people would have the trust to do that.
That's an interesting point. The ruling party doesn't have a single. You're right. The ruling party in India doesn't even have a single Muslim legislator anymore. Forget minister or someone who in high office, neither an MP nor an MLA. I'm afraid I'm completely out of time, but thank you very much to all of you for joining us tonight with some very interesting insights as to what lies ahead. Wish you all the best. Thank you for joining us. Good night.